So Carolina and Ryan are going to come up and we'll open the floor to questions for any of our four speakers, and I think it's going to be really awesome. Okay, so we have a question.
Yeah, my name's Worka. I'm a livestock specialist and co-owner of a company called Grown on the Range Ranch Industries. So I had a question for you, Ryan, because you brought up a very, very interesting topic, which is green roofs. We all know that the great black abyss that is our rooftops throughout the whole nation is that one untapped resources, whether it be for growing food or producing energy. So I have some questions regarding that. So as far as teaching people about, like I said, teaching people about the goodness of having a green roof that you can grow food on and stuff like that, are you also making sure they understand that this is also something that is definitely saving them on their fuel bills as far as heating and cooling? And is your organization looking into that? That's the first question. And then my second question is that it seems like you guys are creating something that I've always dreamt about. My dream is something called the boot commute economy. So in other words, you're never more than a step away from your food. You're never more than a step of where your energy is producing. You're really never more than a step of where you're getting your art and your information from. So with that being said, are you approaching the business owners, those who have roofs that is, and letting them know that, listen, this is something that you should probably be trying to get into too. You guys should have your own green roofs so that you can also be a part of this new society, whereas we're producing our food basically where we live. And it's a third part. So with that being said, if they don't have access to a roof, are you maybe trying to get these guys to understand that this new trend that I've seen all over San Francisco of pop-up parks or pop-up little parts of, where you got in front of your store and you turn it into a little cafe, where they could take and wheel out a raised bed or wheel out a aquaponics setup, and it would be a situation where they'd be able to have their customers come sit in or walk through where their food is grown or produced, and then being able to go into the store and buy it off the shelves. So basically, where are you guys headed as far as trying to make sure that not only the people that are learning how to green up their roofs are able to produce their food, but also the people that are getting that food to sell to know that they could be another cog in that said wheel?
Okay, I'm going to give the mic to Ryan. I just also want to say to the speakers as well that we have a little bit more time than we did earlier with the questions. And so if any people want to chime in,
yes,
on any question, then that's also very welcome.
So thank you for your questions. I'll try to answer all of them. So one, we are a low-income housing developer, so we own the buildings that we have the Rooftop Gardens in. So it makes them existing a little bit easier because there's a lot less hurdles to come through. In terms of energy use and consumption, that wasn't really a motivating factor for growing the food. I was really trying to look at food access. I don't know how the energy uses in the buildings have changed and whatnot over time. I know water consumption has gone up because of course we're irrigating food crops, which are more water intensive than like succulents or things like that. And yeah, a lot of the store owners are not the landowners of the buildings, at least in the Tenderloin, which is a different group to try to target, and they're not necessarily as invested in a community serving space, especially for converting a rooftop garden to grow a sizable amount of food is very labor intensive, and there's seismic issues with it as well, because a cubic foot of wet soil is roughly 80 pounds. So if you want to have enough room on the roof to grow for 80 people, you're talking tonnage of soil, and we're in an earthquake prone area as well, so there's some issues with that. And a lot of the older buildings, the masonry, brick and wood buildings, can't support the weight load, so there's some complexities with that. For the parklets, we looked at one case of actually doing a parklet in the Tenderloin, and we're shut down by the police chief for getting the permitting, or the police captain of the precinct, due to the nature of the neighborhood and a lot of the issues that happen out on the street life. Even though we were looking to activate it with programming and food education, but also like doing yoga and having different nonprofits come out and do eviction defense education and things like that throughout the day. At the night, the Tenderloin's a different neighborhood as well, and there's concerns off like using the space. But that is something I think of activating the public space and using it as a means to grow more food. There's definitely a lot more opportunity for that, and tying it to the educational piece, I think it's essential.
Thank you.
Other question?
I heard of this Tenderloin National Forest. What is that?
Okay. So the Tenderloin National Forest is a project from, I believe, the Luggage Gallery, and it's a guy, I believe his name's Daryl Smith, I believe is his name, he's running it, and it's I don't know if it's a parcel of land, it's a kind of a large alleyway in between two buildings that they've reclaimed as green space in the neighborhood. With the Tenderloin being such a dense neighborhood, access to green space is very limited. There's only, I think, 3 parks, 2 of them are very small. And I don't know a lot about its history, but it is like meant to be a little oasis in the neighborhood that has public art, and green space and trees. They're not growing food there, but it is a green space with trees and whatnot.
So, living in San Francisco and hearing Eugene's great presentation, and thinking back to how people in South of Market or the Tenderloin are so disconnected, not only from growing food, but all green space, what ways can any of you propose, or what strategies would you use to develop their capacity and ultimately their connection with green spaces, land, so that at some point, if they can acquire land, to actually start growing it? Because for me, speaking frankly, I think a lot of those people are just so detached from the idea of buying a plot of land and working it, that it needs to be a progressive sort of process, right? What strategies would you use to encourage that, to develop that capacity?
I guess anyone who, was it Eugene? Anybody who wants to.
I don't know the Tenderloin, but I do know South LA, I do know Southwest Atlanta, which is kind of unique. What I would say is that, well, what we've done is, and I didn't give a lot of background because I was just so like cheat up. Where we have always started is with tree plantings, right? Especially because, like Ryan talks about, there's such an intense water usage when you're trying to grow food crops. So what we have always started with is tree plantings, because tree plantings are good for politicians and they're good for residents, because it's like a one-time situation. You can come out, you can have your whole photo op and all that kind of thing for the nonprofit piece and the politician piece. But also it's really important that we look at small spaces that can't grow vegetation, like a whole thing of corn or tomatoes, but you could plant something that is an edible bush or fruit crop that is native to the area, right? And so that is going to be something that people are going to walk past, they're going to see all the time. And if it happens to be something like goji berries or blueberries or whatever, then they can also eat from it and have that experience, and not have this huge sense of responsibility that comes with a lot of the things that we're talking about. I mean, realistically on planet Earth, it's just a very small population of people who grow the food that everyone else eats. And it takes a certain type of being that is really going to do that, because it's not, very rarely is it going to get all the attention that you're going to get that attention once, but then it comes down to just the really mundane, quiet, private thing of going and doing this work. So tree plantings, we've seen going to public schools is really essential, and going to faith-based institutions is really essential. And saying, look, you have this piece of land anyway, you got people that are coming to this place, you got our children that are coming to this place, let's organize tree plantings on days where it's honoring a principal, it's honoring students, it's honoring great historic figures. If it's their birthday, let's go plant 5 fruit trees for Cesar Chavez Day. You know what I mean? And that way, it's not a big commitment for people to say, I'm gonna put in this garden at a school, and we gotta maintain it through the summer when there's no students there, and you gotta appoint parents to do that and all this kind of, it's just been a big challenge for people. So the first connection would be, let's do some native drought-tolerant medicinal plantings, along with native drought-tolerant fruit tree plantings and shrubs.
I also have a question. I guess I don't need the mic. But, so, what you guys are talking about is, it doesn't only affect food. You're talking about, green spaces and, just an experience of the city. And so, Gustavo was like, let's reclaim space. And there are a lot of movements of reclaiming space that don't have to do with food, really. Reclaim the streets, squat in the city. Like, that idea is a strong idea, even when it's not about food. But a lot of what this whole forum is about, and Miraka is about, is really wresting our food system, but also just our environment, our from corporate control. And so I think that it might be important precisely to not just talk about food, but plant trees, plant things, sort of, that's part of reclaiming our environments as well, and embellishing the places we live and building an ecology that's healthier, really, an ecosystem that's healthier. So, as you guys say, it is a big commitment to say, oh, I'm going to go and actually become a farmer, but what are the ways that somebody who wants to do something now can start kind of that process of reclaiming a little bit of space, growing something where they are, whether or not, first of all, do you think that it's also important to add in a perspective that goes beyond food, and how to concretely start with that? Like, if the people who are here today wanted to do something along those lines, where would they begin?
So to talk about this going beyond food, I tried to talk about direct action. I want to give a shout out to folks at Earth First Journal. I left a couple of copies back there. Even y'all that are taking off, if you want to take a copy of those magazines. Really inspiring stuff where you hear a lot more resistance that people are doing. We don't always get a lot of press every time that people are reclaiming space or are building an alternative. So we have to really value this sharing of experiences, because this is very empowering. It's been really, really terrible times to be looking at the news. And this corporate news, and even the other ways that we access information on the internet, oftentimes gets driven towards the problems. And we don't get to see a lot of the solutions. And a lot of the solutions are not, in terms of petitioning for a new policy or this or that. There are people that are going out there and doing something. There are people that are, disrupting the system that is destroying us. People that are, directly just producing what needs to be produced, whether that is some food or some safety for some other folks or something else, I think that we need to really think about this stuff in terms of courage, and in terms of ourselves as actors and not as consumers. For me, always the weakest side of the vegan movement is that when it gets more to the fringes, it's just a consumer choice. We got to put our bodies on the line. We got to take courage. We got to take the courage, not just to have the glamorous moment, that we can make a little documentary about, but to have the courage to do that daily trough, work, whether it's in, some real dirt trenches or whether that is in something else. Organizing for right to transportation has been very big. Here in Brazil, where I'm from, right now there are dozens, if not a few hundreds of schools occupied in Brazil by high school students demanding, that no, our education is going to be this way. And they're done talking to politicians. And if you never argued with a 13-year-old, yeah, that's inspiring. So, we got to seek out these inspiring stories so that we can take courage, so that we can take action. And our actions will then be more inspiring stories so that other people can take action. You know, whether that's occupying land or schools or buildings or not just occupying but blockading, but doing this. And the more we do that, the better and the more strong we feel to face this stuff. That's my takeaway.
I don't have any solution to this, but I'm just recalling some things, you know, as a person who grew up in San Francisco. When I was a teenager, I remember taking the bus through what was the Fillmore, and then it was being called the Western Addition because they were doing urban renewal, this horribly destructive thing. But I remember seeing all these vacant lots because they torn down all these buildings, and the vacant lots were basically being farmed by older black men mostly, who were, were farming in the city. And maybe the younger people were probably working, maybe unemployment wasn't as, I don't know, I was a teenager, I wasn't very aware of all the issues, but I just remember seeing all this urban farming at that time. This was like the 50s and early 60s. And then the other thing is I used to teach in ESL to immigrants from Southeast Asia, Mien from Laos, who came directly from their farms. And I think a lot of them lived in Bernal and the Mission and the Tenderloin. And in Bernal Hill, they had their community gardens where they grew all those same vegetables that they used to grow. And I visited some of them in their community garden, and that's with the food that they ate. And I'm wondering if that's still going on and why more of this, if this is still happening and how we can make that.
I think it's essential to look larger than just, one dimension of, I think accessing land and accessing food and growing food and supporting yourself and cultivating things are essential in taking a step towards changing the way that the system operates. But fundamentally, I think what we're trying to do is build community, which is how you change things, right? You couldn't have occupied the farm without a community coming around together around it, right? The Zapatistas is not an individual movement, it's a collective. And it's important to build community to meet people where they're at, right? And so food is not the essential issue for everyone, right? It's the way that the corporate food system operates impacts everybody, and there's negative consequences and equity issues across the full spectrum. But as Roberto was speaking on earlier, the low-income communities are also facing displacement here in the Bay Area, police brutality, job loss, and high incarceration rates, right? And going to those people and trying to say, hey, growing food is, going to change your life on everything. You're like, well, I'm about to get evicted. I would love to have some good food, but that's not my priority right now. And that doesn't mean that there's not intersections and there's not connections between the different movements, but I think it's essential to recognize people's truth, right, and where they're at. And I've talked with some people who come from other cultures in different countries, and where growing food is looked down upon, right? You're a peasant, right? And so trying to get them engaged in growing food efforts now, they already have this mindset that is connected to low class work, right? And that doesn't mean that has to be, you can change that, and change their perspective on things, but you have to start with building community, and you have to start with seeing where people are at and what their issues are that are impacting them, and how there's connections, and what's the common denominator between accessing land and getting back to the earth and the issues that they face.
Is there any question? I have one for Eugene. So we started out with Chris talking a bit about what the problem is and how central our food system is to just problems generally, environmental, labor, etc. And so here we're hearing, let's build the alternatives, let's build something that is different, a different system. And Eugene, you're doing that in the ways that people are talking about, but you're taking it in a step further in the sense that you're also doing something differently from the general systems, in the sense that you're farming without any animal inputs, any animals. removing yourself from animal exploitation. So you're not only doing what a lot of us are talking about in the sense of an alternative of a food system, but you're doing the alternative even to most alternatives. So maybe do you want to, we're going to talk more about that tomorrow, but just kind of explain how that's a step further.
Sure. So on the back table, there's a postcard. I don't know if I do have it here. This postcard here, it says, why veganic growing? And then it has our website on it. And this is and then on the back, it has information about what is veganic agriculture. And I want to be real clear on something. I did not create this postcard. I would have never created this postcard. But it does speak to the reason why sticking to whatever it is that we're choosing to do and all the different things that we do are important, because everything that we're all doing is crucial and valuable. And as Brother Ryan is saying, it's about creating the community. And in the community, you have the people that run their lane. So the way this postcard got created is because one of our community partners is an organization called A Well-Fed World. Have anybody's heard of A Well-Fed World? All right, so from what I understand, and I'm very new to their work, as I'm new to most people's work, is that they're about humane animal treatment and really trying to get all the way away from the slaughter of animals. And some of the representatives were streaming the internet, and they found a video of myself building a compost pile at one of our farm sites in Atlanta. It's a farm site called Truly Living Well. I'm saying this stuff because I'm hoping that maybe somebody will write this down or check their phone and see that there's a plethora of amazing work happening that we've been engaged with. And so they were streaming the internet. They saw this video where I'm building these compost piles that are no-turn compost piles using vegetable scraps and leaf matter from throughout Atlanta. And the woman called me up and she said, "Yo, are you a vegan?" And I said, I don't know. And she said, "Well, do you eat animals?" I said, "No, I haven't eaten animals in years and years and years." And she said, "Do you eat milk products?" And I was like, "No, there's no reason for me to." And she said, "So you're a vegan?" I said, "Okay." All right, cool. And she said, "Well," and this is, again, I only know one way of communication. It's straight from the heart. So she said, "Look, we have this organization. This is what we do. And we're very conscious of the fact that the veganic movement in the United States is perceived in a particular way. It's perceived as a white privileged lifestyle. I'm obviously not white. The privilege I have is that I'm a being and a son of the creator of all. But other than that, not too much privilege, right?" And she said, "So we're very interested in finding people of color who are doing vegan activist work or veganic work." I said, "Well, I'm not an activist. I've never heard of what veganic is. So I don't know if I'm doing that." She said, "You are doing it." I said, "Okay, great. I like that term. Veganic is kind of hip. It's new. It's fresh. I'll deal with it. Whatever I can do to sell these vegetables to these restaurants so that I can make sure that my children have what they need." So I'm open to it. But more importantly, it came with financial support. And so what I want to stress to all of us in this room is that because of, or let me back it up. How many of you have seen Cowspiracy? All right, great. So because of that information was new to me, but I've been growing food in this way for years and years and years. But the information of how much animal agriculture contributes to climate change is extraordinarily profound information. It's also very much hidden information. And I want to let you know something that you may already know, but it was news to me, is that there's a community of vegan people who have the vegan lifestyle, especially here in California, which is an entertainment capital of the world, right? That have a lot of money.
Yes.
They have a lot of money. And they're really committed to doing something to save our planet. And they are willing to put their money up to do it and make it happen. And they also fully recognize that that is what they're going to put up. Right? Leonardo DiCaprio is not going to farm. But when he saw Cowspiracy and saw that the gentleman was getting into issues, he put paper up and said, "Let's get this film on Netflix so people can see it." And it's the same in our line of work. So because I do believe in saving our people, because the planet's going to be all right, but I'd like it to be a planet that can sustain people. And because I value my children and the potential of all of our families, this is the way I've chosen to live for 15 years now. Never knowing that it had a title, and definitely not knowing that there was a quiet group of people who have big money who have decided to become vegans because of environmental reasons. I became a vegan because of spiritual reasons and health, but I wasn't even thinking about environmental stuff. But these people are thinking about it, and we're working as a community coming from different perspectives. And they have said, listen, if you can continue to be a brown, black face out here representing this type of lifestyle, we know that it's very important because we as white women in this organization, a well-fed world, cannot impact and touch those communities. Is this making sense? So they said, if you'll just continue to do what you already do, we will make sure that you have resources, support, and amplify your voice. Part of that comes with a big box of postcards that they sent to my house, right? I didn't have to figure out any of this. But it does have our website on the front, and it has amazing information on the back that I completely agree with. That's what's happening. That when we stick to that mission, like our brother sticking to the mission and all the folks over at that tract of land, then the filmmaker shows up. And that filmmaker spent his whole life making his skills tight, which made an amazing piece of work. So this is what I'm seeing, is that there's no shortage of money. So for anybody who's working in these fields, in the nonprofit sector, or just doing it straight from their own spirit, I'm here to tell you there is a lot of money.
What was the name of the film again?
The film is Cowspiracy. Cowspiracy, like cow, like the moo. But there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of support out there. But what has to happen is that people have to know about what we're doing, which speaks to all of us having international connections by being on that World Wide Web. But more speaks to whatever it is that you're doing, continue to do it so that people can eventually see it. And when they see it, you're going to be literally flooded with support. And I'm living proof of that, because these folks found me. I'm not sure how you even found us, but they found me, and I'm here in San Francisco. I don't have money for a plane ticket. You know what I mean? I don't even really have the resources to not be on the farm right now. But I'm being so filled by this experience that we just continue to say yes. So that's what's happening. We're just continuing to say yes to what we believe to be the proper direction.
I also had a question for Carolina, but I guess it's not exactly on the same topic, if that's okay. But Carolina, you were talking about the Zapatistas and, land autonomy and their manner of organizing. But I'm wondering, now that everybody else has spoken about their work in San Francisco, Atlanta, Bay Area, how do you think that we can hear what you've been talking about and sort of take inspiration or apply any lessons here?
This is a really good question. And I know that's what they want us to think about, because part of the reason for the escuelitas was to show us what they're doing and then to tell us how they organized in the first place. The last escuelita was the responsables, the people who were basically kind of the political cadre of the organization starting in the early 80s, how they recruited more people, how they really educated people about the necessity to struggle and the causes of the suffering they were experiencing and what was behind it. That's what they've been sharing with us in this second escuelita. It's amazing information. How we can use it is what we're all struggling with. Because that's really what the Zapatistas are asking us to do, is not just to support them. Sure, it's great to raise money to help their autonomous education or some economic project. But really, we all need each other. We all need to be organizing in wherever we are. And I think autonomy has a lot to do with land. The reason they've been so successful is because they have community, as somebody was saying. They have indigenous communities, and what they've done is they've taken what they have traditionally and maintained it and built it more in terms of their decision-making processes. They refuse to use the processes of the governments and elections, which are really for show. And they have assemblies, and they have their own justice system. And so they're taking their old way of doing things and building on it, and then they have their herbal medicines, which they're rediscovering. But they're also, one time I was there, and this health promoter came to help somebody who was sick, and he was doing some kind of massage, and I said, "Oh, is that traditional Mayan massage?" And he said, "No, it's Chinese." So they're taking whatever they can learn from the world to better their skills in their own autonomy, instead of using they're not consumers anymore. That's the thing. This whole thing about consumerism is, they're always talking about, as a consumer, what do you think? Well, I don't want to be a consumer. I mean, I guess we are. I don't know how to deal with that when living in the city, but that's what they're trying not to be. They want to really produce their own products or trade with others who are doing the same. But how can we do it? That's a really good question. I think, this land-based, it's really hard in the city. But building community in the city is good. I mean, how could we occupy the farm? Or even, in the Tenderloin, building community, I think, is the root.
Roberto, I'm wondering, you probably mentioned this, I think you did touch on it, but what do you think was the galvanizing thing to make people come and essentially put themselves physically on the line? I personally, as an activist, have found that people hang back a lot unless there's some cohesive thing, like a tribe, a perceived tribe that they belong to, or whatever. It's very much kind of a groupthink thing. There is that expression, which I introduced Eugene to, of slacktivism. And we have this electronic activism where like or a retweet will suffice. But actually FaceTime, even to go to important local meetings, is sometimes very, very hard to get people to do. And we've had success depending on the issues, depending on the time of year, depending on lots of stuff. Or even how it's framed, of course, in their social media. But there's always a special ingredient, I think, that really will create that mass movement to activate. And what would you say it was? Was it the issue alone? Was it a sense of siege, maybe, that caused people to rally?
I think that the first occupation, it wasn't anything about the particular land itself. It was the Occupy movement more broadly. The core folks that organized the occupation had been organizing the Occupy Oakland, had been organizing the occupation of Wheeler Hall at UC Berkeley in 2008. So you're right, there still is a group of people that have known each other for several years and that have engaged in multiple forms of direct action and political work. That being said, that particular conjuncture, that moment of the Occupy movement, there was a mass movement. These folks were able to channel what had been a mass movement that lost its home after that winter. You know, Oscar Grant Plaza was taken out by December. This occupation was in February, 2 months right after. So we were building on that stamina. Now, the important part, I think, then to say is like, well, we can't just always count on, you know, that being the case. And it's been the most difficult for us to sustain organizing through all the ebbs and flows. The model that has started to be worked with Occupy the Farm is an adaptation of the MST model in Brazil. Because over these years, there's been increasingly closer contact between some of these folks in the Bay and as well as some other parts of the U.S., food sovereignty movements in general, and in Brazil. In fact, we even have an MST militant right now who's been staying a couple of months with us here in the Bay Area learning English and sharing experiences with several different groups. So that model is a model of kind of like spokes, where you'd have smaller groups of people that can be keeping in touch with each other, who know each other a little bit more, are more familiar, and, you know, every week or other week or something, one person of that group goes to a Thursday night meeting that we have at the farm. And then that person then takes on the responsibility to bring back and then to share on that information. And then these different groups of folks end up also taking on particular different tasks. An organizing model that we had before, which was more directly based on the MST, was that we'd have a particular group doing media work, a particular group doing production work, a particular group doing, you know, sort of organizing students on campus type work. This has become more fluid and it's taken more of the spokes council, spokes, you know, set of affinity groups in a way. It's been very challenging. I can't say really that any particular model, the earlier model or what we're doing now is better or worse. It's been challenging all along. Personally, I've been away for a couple of years and I've just gotten back to the Bay a couple of months ago. So there's a moment there of our organizing that I missed after the 2013 occupation and this moment in 2015. But in general, I think that, you know, it's important for us to recognize that, you know, we need these types of long established relations of trust in order to be able to pull off some more high stakes type of action, for example. But in the end, the type of community building that needs to be done is the type of organizing work that will sustain itself. We recognize that people will have different parts of their lives. We recognize that when we have kids, for example, we no longer have the same amount of time that we did before we had the kids. And then we might have that time later on when the kids head out, but then we might not have that muscle that we had way back then. So we have to recognize these ebbs and flows in our own lives and in everyone's lives and try and find ways that people can always be plugging in. So our idea with, you know, talking about climate and talking about using the space for a lot more than just, you know, sort of harping on the same note is precisely that. Is saying, look, there's a lot of other work and a lot of other people that have energy, that have the motivation that right now we are not being able to pull off anymore, you know. And I think that we have to then also recognize that just as we might personally might become burned out at some moment, we can come back. And just as we might lose a battle, we can still continue fighting the war, you know. And one thing to learn from experiences that are a lot more rooted and a lot bigger, like in the Zapatistas and other indigenous people struggles, like the MST and other peasant struggles, is that you have to have resiliency. You know, you have to know that you're going to be kicked out of a land that you're trying to take once, twice, 3 times. You have to know that you might be camping out and fighting for the land for 2, 3, 5 years or more. You know, having this mentality and being able to do the emotional, the care work with each other that is part of cultivating community, I think is the way that we've tried to do, the way that we've been learning with folks, the way that we continue learning with y'all here, and that I hope we can, you know, strengthen and go on.
So the only other thing I want to say is a comment. A couple of you referred to young activists and the power of young activists, and I want to say that some of us young activists became older activists, and we don't stop. Plus, we do have that time freedom, and as I talked about with Eugene in private, we have a some of us have a commitment to stewardship of the future. It may not be a future that we will see, but we're very committed to it. We also have a wisdom which is in very short supply, I find, in some cultures, including ours, of about not only people, but about the bigger picture. And in working with younger people, I realized what a short time frame they have, and we're able to provide that. There, you know, this is a deeply, deeply, appallingly ageist culture, and young people are somewhat terrified of getting older because they don't see functional people being how they want to be when they're older, and they don't get that wisdom often. And there's a lot of age segregation and all that stuff. I don't need to, it's preaching to the choir. But I would say that one of the biggest resources that I found, even in rearing my children, was finding older people who are, first of all, very generous with their knowledge and also extremely empathic about sharing it and about committing themselves to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madeline's comment actually made me think of something. A lot of the people, as has been mentioned several times today, or Ryan, or, you know, if we want to do more of these activities in the city, is that something that we should try to actively start thinking about, you know, saying, you know, oh, there are all these people who just got here from Yucatan and who were, you know, left their milpas.
I'd love to take that. Again, I would like to try to keep putting in some real things. So one of the things that the brother was saying about being taken off your land. So we've started a handful of different farming projects throughout Atlanta and had them taken from us. And each time we've started these projects, we've made sure we engage the youth and school groups and all that. And one time a junior high school class came out to the farm, and they were actually studying social justice. They were from a very rich part of town, and they were coming to the middle of the hood. And it was question and answer time, and the youth had some interesting questions. And then the teacher said, well, y'all don't own this land. How do you feel about farming on land that you don't own? And I said to her, we've always farmed on land that we didn't own, right? So the context is really important, because what you bring up is the fact that we're all finding ourselves here on this land. And many of us have come to this land for all types of different reasons, and we've been driven to this land by a lot of different circumstances. And what we have found in the South is that, or what I found in the South is that it's not the same as it is in San Francisco. Obviously, the population is different, but the population of people that have kept the knowledge around agriculture and food, medicines, and the importance of nature are, in Atlanta, it's a lot of African American people that have the legacy of coming here through slavery. And obviously they, similar type of thing, they're not necessarily being asked about it, nor do they feel a great deal of pride about their knowledge because they connect it to being owned, right? So what we have done is partnered with churches, because in Atlanta, in the South, churches own a lot of land. And one of our major issues is that we have been doing things on pieces of property that are not owned by us, or they're owned by people who don't really give a damn. So the churches own this land, they've had this land, and they have just big places where they're just mowing the grass. And so once we start the garden, then you have church members that come out and they see these tomatoes growing, and suddenly here come all those stories, right? And so it's really, again, what everyone's talking about, it's about relationships and also the specifics of the communities. So if the communities here are Central American communities, and they have not been asked to speak about this, one of the things that we have done twice that's been very successful is Grow Where You Are. We sell food to restaurants like in Beverly Hills type of thing, in a space called in a part of town called Buckhead. So these are the top restaurants in the city that are interested in promoting themselves as farm-to-table restaurants. So essentially, it's like growing the food, from what I'm hearing, maybe like in the West Bay, and then selling it up in, I don't know what part of town, but some rich part of town out here, right? And we sell that food. We have great relationship with these chefs, and so we decided to have something called Gather Around the Medicine Wheel, which was a free feast for 200 people in Southwest Atlanta on our farm. And we had the chefs, top chefs in the nation, a chef named Josh Hopkins, who is at a restaurant called Empire State South. They came down, we dug a fire pit at our farm. These chefs came down and cooked for 200 people for free. And we invited the people from the community and, of course, people from the other side of town to come and sit with each other and have a meal. And it was a vegan meal of all of our produce and then oyster mushrooms and lion's mane mushrooms and all that kind of stuff. So what you had was a combination of things. We were taking people who are not vegan, who are traditional carnivores or omnivores, and feeding them oyster mushrooms, lion's mane mushrooms, and then all the food that we grew on the farm. And they're looking at it thinking that it's meat. And so they're sitting at the table with somebody who lives in a $500,000 house 8 miles away and somebody who's living in the projects directly across the street. And we're sitting at a long table having a meal that nobody had to pay for other than us. But they all got to sit and eat this food that was veganic, that brought them next to people that they would never ever meet, but it was all based on the relationships that were started really based on commerce. Because we are selling this food to make a living. And we are selling it to the chefs that can pay top dollar. Is that making sense? So we're going outside of our community to start these relationships with people who have already said, hey, we're farm to table restaurants. We'll pay you $8 a pound for collard greens. I can't charge nobody in my hood $8 a pound for collard greens. But I can take it up the street and do that. And then these chefs are getting popular based on the ingredients. Anyone who's a chef knows that your food gets better if you have the best ingredients. It makes their life easier. So then the relationship is good, and then we ask them once a year, come down here and cook for people for free. And people get to watch them cook this over an open fire. And you know, when you sit around a campfire, all those memories for everybody. Every culture has the memory of cooking over an open fire. There's no culture. From Europe down to Africa, we all do that. So we've started by feeding people first before asking them to do the work.
Yeah, Adam?
Okay, so I just want to thank you all. I actually have to leave because I'm going to go have a dinner with an organization called Citizen Well, which you may know of, and they have an opportunity up here that actually involves a lot of food justice work and community organizing and coalition building, and we're going to go find out more about it, and it's just really inspiring to hear you all speaking about that and having such a broad perspective and being so thoughtful and incorporating all the different issues that go into food and farming. So just thank you. It's really great, and I get to go in there with a lot of new knowledge bubbling up and just really inspiring. So thank you.
That's Nassim. Check